Well, back in May 2023, the United States Surgeon General issued a report that he called the loneliness epidemic. And he stated in this report that it had really been a trend that had been growing since around 2010, which is when social media first came onto the scene. And it kind of peaked during the COVID pandemic, and it had become such a problem that as a society, we needed to take some time and think about it. And he talked about in his report, it wasn't just from personal failings, but it really was a societal failing. It's an issue that as an entire nation we needed to focus on. And he's absolutely right. And there's a lot of people today that are struggling with loneliness. And it's got some really detrimental effects. In fact, it's been stated that struggling with loneliness for an extended period of time is the equivalent of smoking up to 15 cigarettes per day. It can drastically increase your risk of heart disease, heart attacks, strokes, even dementia in older adults. There was a psychiatrist named Dr. Daniel Knopfenmacher. I've been working on that name all morning. Could you imagine this guy growing up in grade school learning to spell his name? He's got 4 consonants in a row. I didn't even know that was possible in the English language, but he wrote a pretty profound thought. He said loneliness and social isolation becomes detrimental when they persist for extended periods of time. We are wired as human beings to connect with others. Our brains are designed for social connectedness. Our survival from birth into adulthood depends on it. And he's absolutely right. In fact, you didn't have to study humans to learn that. You didn't have to study psychology or psychiatry. All you had to do is open your Bible to Genesis chapter 2, and in verse 18, God said, as he created humans, it's not good for mankind to be alone. We were created with this need for one another. There's a lot of people, maybe even some of you here today, maybe some that are watching online, that have experienced or are experiencing the effects of loneliness. And what we can tend to do when we feel lonely and when we are feeling that social disconnection is that we can turn to things like social media to meet that need. And it doesn't work, does it? In fact, with the growing trend of loneliness has been the increased usage of social media. So what do we need? What is the answer to our loneliness? Well, I want to put before you this morning that actually the answer to our loneliness is Jesus. Just Jesus. He is the answer that we need, because with Jesus comes tremendous blessings that maybe we didn't fully recognize. This morning, I want to look at a story of a man in the Bible from Mark chapter 10 who definitely knew what loneliness felt like, but his experience with Jesus completely changed him, and I think it gives us hope too. In verse 46 of Mark 10, the story opens that they came to Jericho. So Jesus and this entourage are traveling along, and they come to this place called Jericho. Now, Jericho is a really popular town in the story of the Bible. You might remember all the way back in the book of Joshua that there's that famous story about Jericho where the Israelites are going to march around the city walls. They seem to be impenetrable. This city could never be overtaken because of the walls of Jericho. But they marched around the city one time a day for 6 days. And then on day 7, they marched around 7 times. And they didn't throw things at the wall. They just blasted their trumpets and shouted. And the walls came tumbling down. And they were able to overtake the city. And Joshua actually puts a curse upon the city of Jericho for anybody that would rebuild it. And, well, eventually the city of Jericho did get rebuilt. It was rebuilt under Herod the Great. And he basically made it his winter home, built a palace there, and it was a major thoroughfare. It's at about 15 miles northeast of Jerusalem, about 5 miles away from the Jordan River in this valley area that was really good for growing agriculture. And it had a really popular road. A lot of people traveled down the road toward Jericho or out of Jericho. And because of that, it became kind of a dangerous road because there would be robbers who would sit on this road and wait to ambush people because it sat in the valley. If you remember the story of the Good Samaritan, the man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. And so it tells us that as Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples, he's got this great crowd of people that followed him. And there's a guy named Bartimaeus. He's a blind beggar. He's the son of Timaeus. He's sitting by the roadside. That phrase, son of Timaeus, is actually redundant. It's already told us Bartimaeus. The word bar means son of. So to say Bartimaeus and then to say the son of Timaeus is just a redundant phrase. But the reason why it gives us his name and tells us who he's the son of is because of what the phrase Timaeus means. It means of worth, something that is valuable. He's the son of value. He's the son of worth. But you can imagine being a blind beggar, he really doesn't feel that way, does he? He sits by the roadside every day on the most popular thoroughfare and just begs. And if anybody knows what it's like to be lonely, it's probably Bartimaeus. But he wasn't born blind. At some point in his life, he became blind. It makes me wonder, was it from this accident? Was there a time that he suffered a tragedy and he lost his vision? Or was it from some type of illness that attacked his eyes and he lost his sight? Or was it a slow, progressive condition that just over time got worse until he got to the point that he could no longer see? And as a result, not only could he not work, but he was even kicked out of the spiritual society. You see, as someone who'd become blind, everybody in his life assumed he became blind because he or somebody else had done something so wicked in the eyes of God that this was his punishment. And because he was blind, he was put into this class of people considered unclean, which meant he couldn't go to the temple, he couldn't offer sacrifices, he couldn't engage in worship. He had no community. His only friends were hunger and uncertainty. And so he hears that Jesus is coming by and he begins to cry out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. That phrase, son of David, speaks volumes about his hope. Even though he's lost his vision, even though he has no way to make a living, he still has hope that the Messiah is going to come and he's going to make everything right. There is someone that is coming that's going to bring healing, and he's heard about Jesus, and he goes ahead and ties his hope to Jesus. He believes that Jesus has the ability to heal him. Jesus is the one who's going to make everything right. And he cries out, have mercy on me. And people start telling him, be silent. Hush, man. He doesn't have time for you. He's too busy. He's too important. You're too dirty. You're too unclean. Just be quiet. He doesn't have anything to do with people like you. But he's desperate. And he just gets louder and louder. Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Well, Jesus heard him, and he stopped and called for Bartimaeus to come to him. And they said, take heart, get up. He's calling you. Isn't it wild that the people who are telling him to hush are now telling him to take heart? Those are two conflicting messages, aren't they? So he throws off his cloak, springs up to his feet, and he comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, what do you want me to do for you? What a question. You're asking a blind beggar, what do you want me to do for you? You got two choices, Jesus. One, give me vision. Two, give me money. Take your pick. I'll take either one, right? But Jesus doesn't ask questions he doesn't know the answer to. So why does he ask him this question? The same reason he asked you and I similar questions. It's an opportunity for us to verbalize our faith. It's an opportunity for us to name our need. When you go to God in prayer, does he know exactly what you need? Yes. But he still allows you the opportunity and request of you to make the request known to him so that you can verbalize your faith and dependence on him. You can grow in your trust. And so Bartimaeus said, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. Bartimaeus represents you and I. His physical blindness represents our spiritual blindness. See, we've been blinded by life. We've been blinded by sin. We've been blinded by Satan. And we have this inability to see, not physically. But this word recover is so fascinating. It literally means to look up. That's what it means, to look up. And the reason why Bartimaeus represents you and I is because we are so prone and so guilty of just looking down, of just seeing what is right in front of us, just focusing on what I can taste and see and touch and smell and hear, just this physical existence. I can get so guilty of just focusing on this, and whatever it that's right in front of me, whether it's some type of need or crisis or struggle, and that's all there is. And what do I need most? I need to look up. I need to do like what Hurston just read for us from Colossians 3, to get my mind not on things that are here on this earth, but on things that are above. And what Jesus is offering to Bartimaeus, he's offering to us as well, this ability to get our eyes up and to no longer just see just this realm and just this dimension and just the physical, but lift our eyes upward to see that there's a whole nother spiritual realm operating all around us, that God is present within our world, that God is invading earth, that heaven and earth being reunited, so that there's hope to all of my struggles and all of my challenges. And when I get my eyes down and I only focus on my next step and on my next need, Jesus is saying, lift your eyes up. Place your mind not just here, but in heaven. Think about things that are far greater than you could ever imagine. This is the hope that Jesus is offering to us. And Paul, in the same letter, just in a few chapters earlier, describes how Jesus becomes this amazing opportunity for healing. In some of the most beautiful language ever written about Jesus, Paul said, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. When you see Jesus, you are looking at God in the flesh. You want to know what God looks like? He looks like a man asking a blind beggar, what do you want me to do for you? He's the firstborn of all creation. By Jesus, all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities. All things were created through him and for him. He is before all things and he holds all things together. He's the sustainer of everything. He says he's the head of the body, the church, the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. In some translations, so that he might have the supremacy. He is supreme. I'm not talking about supreme pizza, which is by far the worst pizza. Well, maybe cheese is the worst, but supreme's in a close second. He's supreme, meaning he is the best. He is first, well above everything else. He deserves every bit of energy that we have. He should be greatest in our lives because he is greatest in all of the universe. And in all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him, he's reconciled all things to himself, whether on earth or in heaven. See how he's reuniting heaven and earth so that we can get our eyes upward, all by the blood that he shed on the cross as he makes peace. What a powerful phrase, as he makes peace. And so, he's going to continue, Paul does in Colossians 1. Where he says, this is Jesus, but here's you. You know, you, at one time you were alienated. You were hostile in mind, doing evil deeds. And it wasn't totally your fault. You were blinded. Your eyes were closed to seeing anything other than what's right in front of you. Satan has blinded the minds of unbelievers so they cannot see the gospel of the light of the glory of Jesus Christ. He's blinded us. He's got us just to focus on just us, on our desires, on our flesh, on just the here and now. And we all have struggled with that. But Jesus has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death. He's brought heaven and earth back together, given us the opportunity to lift our eyes upward in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. This is the healing that Jesus promises. Why couldn't Bartimaeus go into the temple? Why couldn't he worship God? Because he was unholy, because he was filled with blemishes and filled with sin. You and I are too. We can't enter the presence of God because we're not holy, because we are filled with sin. We're not blameless. There's a lot of reproach. There's a lot of reasons for accusations in our lives. That's who you once were. That's what Paul said. But we've been reconciled to God. We've been, according to what happened to Bartimaeus, we've been made well by faith. That's a powerful line. Your faith has made you well. Some translations say your faith has healed you. It's a word that ties to a Hebrew word shalom. Have you ever heard the phrase or word shalom? If you were to travel over to Israel and you were to walk around, the people who are native Jews or native Israel would tell you shalom. It's become a greeting. It means, I hope you are well. But really, it's even greater than that. It's a word you read in the Bible. It's translated peace, but the idea is it means to be made whole, where something had been fractured and broken or something had been taken out of it. It's been completely restored. It's now been made whole. And so to say your faith has made you well, he's saying your vision has been completely restored. And that's what Jesus is offering to us. It's not just peace. It's not just this idea of calmness of mind, but it's this idea of complete healing, of our vision completely restored, so that we have the ability to look up, to no longer just focus on this life, on this earth, on just the physical, but to get our eyes upward. This is the hope that Jesus brings to us, because the supremacy of Jesus, don't miss it, is what transforms us. It's him being so beautiful and majestic and life-changing. When we truly experience his love, it changes us, completely transforms us into different people. This is his goal, is to change you. The question is how? I want to give you one of the ways he does that. It's a lifelong process, but one of the ways that Jesus changes us is through the church, because the church becomes this place of transformation. Did you notice that when it described Bartimaeus' healing, there's a little line that I neglected to read that said after he was healed, he began to follow Jesus. And by following Jesus, he also joins this crowd of people that were following Jesus. By experiencing healing, he's not only healed physically, but now he's healed emotionally and spiritually and relationally. It's not just that Jesus was the answer to his vision problem, his physical need, but Jesus was also the answer to his emotional struggle, his spiritual struggle, and his relational struggle. And he's added to this community of people. So he's no longer experiencing the problem of loneliness. This is the hope that Jesus gives to us. This is the beauty of the church. This is where the transformation happens. I put before you that the church is like this cocoon. You've seen a caterpillar that develops this cocoon around it, right? And when you look at a picture of a cocoon, doesn't it look peaceful? It looks so nice. It's kind of beautiful and majestic. But that's only because you can't see what goes on the inside. But when you think about this process of this ugly caterpillar that's going to emerge as something beautiful, I can guarantee you the process on the inside of the cocoon is nowhere near as beautiful and peaceful and calm as what it looks like from the outside. Welcome to church. On the outside, from a 30,000-foot view, the church looks beautiful and majestic and peaceful, but on the inside, it's filled with people who are going through this changing process. And sometimes it's challenging, because change is difficult, is it not? Is change difficult? It's January. Is change difficult? Yes. If you made those resolutions and you're going through, it's now January the 12th. Right? And maybe you're sticking with it and you're grinding through, and maybe you're like, that's for the birds, man. That's awful. I'll figure it out next year, right? Because change is tough. It's exhausting. And Paul knows that. That's why in Colossians 1 he continues. This process of changing, it's going on as you're continuing in the faith. And the way it will work is when you're stable and steadfast and you're not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard. But let's be honest, as we're continuing to change in this process of transformation, sometimes we're not stable, are we? Sometimes we're unstable. Sometimes we're inconsistent. Our beliefs don't match our actions. Have you ever experienced that before? I tell my family all the time how much I love them. But there are times that I act in unloving ways. Have you ever dealt with that? Have you ever experienced that and been guilty of being inconsistent? You say you believe one thing, but living it out is a completely different idea and challenge. And even in the church, we say it's all about Jesus. Well, let's be honest. Sometimes we make it about us. And we say we love one another deeply and dearly, and we do. But sometimes we do things that hurt one another, don't we? I saw this meme or post on social media the other day that said, if you've ever been hurt by church that wasn't God, that was God's people, don't blame God. And it's true. God didn't hurt you. It was God's people, and we are not perfect by any means. But sometimes getting hurt by God's people feels like getting hurt by God, doesn't it? Because we've become the eyes, the ears, the hands, the feet, the heart of Jesus, haven't we? And it becomes this challenge because on the outside, it looks beautiful and peaceful and majestic, but on the inside, it can be a little unstable sometimes. And sometimes we're not steadfast. We're not as persistent as we need to be. Sometimes we get worn down and we get exhausted and we're trying to change. We're trying to do better. We're trying to continue in the faith, but Satan is attacking. Life's wearing us down and we're just feeling exhausted and we feel like giving up sometimes. And maybe we start to slack a little bit in our attendance and in our participation because we're wearing down a little bit and we're not as steadfast as we need to be. And it's like what it says in Hebrews chapter 10 that we need to be encouraged, or the language the Hebrew writer uses is we need to be spurred on. Have you ever gotten spurred? Boy, I hope not. I'm not talking about stepping on a sand spur. I'm talking about, have you ever seen someone riding a horse with spurs on their boots and they use those spurs to dig them into the horse a little bit for when that horse wants to slack a little bit because it wants to just take the easy route. It just doesn't work quite as hard as it needs to. And so you just take that spur and you just dig it into the side a little bit and then the horse goes, oh, that kind of hurt a little bit. I guess I'll work a little bit harder. And I'm not saying we should walk around kicking one another with spurs on our boots, but sometimes we need a spiritual kind of swift kick to the pants, right? We need to be pushed a little bit, and we need to be challenged a little bit, and we need to be admonished a little bit, and we need to be encouraged a little bit. We need to be just kind of nudged to keep on when we feel like we want to give up. And we're losing heart, and we're wearing down, and we need someone to come alongside us, throw their arm around us, say, I love you, and I'm concerned, I miss you. Is everything okay? On the outside, it looks really peaceful, doesn't it? Man, on the inside, our hearts are going through this process that's really tough. And we get to that point where we're like, I just don't know if I can do this. It's where we need God's Spirit and we need His people. And sometimes we shift, don't we? We shift and drift. We're like a ship that's dropped its anchor. And we think we're okay. We just don't realize the anchor hasn't gripped. It's dragging along the floor of the ocean. And all of a sudden, the ship is drifting. Don't realize it until it gets close to the rocks. And that becomes our spiritual life where we're trying to serve Jesus. We think we're settled and we're anchored to Him, but we don't realize how much culture is impacting us. We don't realize little temptations that are creeping in through the door. We don't realize how our hearts are just slowly drifting from Jesus because we're not as aware as we need to be, and we wake up and we go, my goodness, what in the world happened? How did I get here? Because on the outside, it looks really peaceful, doesn't it? But on the inside, transformation is difficult. And this is the image. This is what God chose for you to experience true transformation, not in isolation, in community. You need the church as much as the butterfly needs the cocoon. And sometimes it's challenging. Sometimes it hurts. Sometimes we're inconsistent. Sometimes we're unstable. Sometimes we want to give up. But on the other side is beauty, absolute beauty. And full maturity, fully trusting Jesus. So this morning, if you're struggling with loneliness, you're at the right place to experience not the church, but to experience Jesus. We are not the answer to your loneliness. Jesus is. But you get us too, and we'll help meet that need. You need Jesus. And we will do everything that we can to be his hands and his feet and his eyes and his arms, to receive you in loving care. If you're here this morning and your faith's been a little unstable, you've shifted, you feel like giving up, the change is hard, you're in the cocoon, you're at the right place. We're all struggling in this transformation process. There's healing and beauty that is being offered to you. And if we can encourage you, if we can pray for you, we'd love to do that. This morning, if you've never surrendered your life to Jesus, you've not experienced true healing. But he's offering that to you today, to begin this complete transformation process of your life, so that your vision, not physically, but spiritually, can be restored. And it begins this morning by looking up and seeing the one who gave his life for you. If you're ready to be baptized into Christ, we'd love to celebrate that with you today, for you to be born again and to be made whole. If we can encourage you anyway today, please let us know. Together we stand and sing. Just as